subject. So let's maybe get started. We've got lots of content to get through for you today. We will start with our welcome to country. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which we are meeting today, wherever you may be joining us from. I pay respects to the elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. At cubesys, we recognise the deep and ongoing connection the First Nations peoples have with country, culture and community, and we're committed to listening, learning and walking together in the spirit of reconciliation. Thank you for that. One more bit of housekeeping before I introduce the speakers. This is a discussion series format which cubesys will be running now for a couple of years, so we do really encourage you to ask questions, whether that's in chat or if you feel brave enough to come off on the mic and speak to us, that's great. We will record this session and we'll make that available for everybody, and we'll send through the slide deck and notes. So our marketing team will be in touch post-event to make sure you've got all the collateral that you need. Okay, let's jump into the speakers and do some introductions. Why don't we start with you, Russell? And because you're a guest of honour here today and you're going to bring some of the client perspective. So if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, no pressure. I'm Russell Pead. I'm the head of ICT at Uniting Vic.Tas. Excuse me for being brief, but I hate talking about myself. As you may be able to tell, I'm South African. I moved here 23 years ago, and I'm probably going to stay. I've worked across a few different sectors, banking in South Africa, and then manufacturing when I moved to Australia, and now community services at Uniting Vic.Tas. I've endured more than 30 years in IT, primarily on an infrastructure path, with the last 15 or so in ICT management. And my management roles have generally had a strong focus on cost optimization and business efficiencies.
Joe, that was an interesting word, and I think I can work with you on that one. Why don't we jump to George next, who's a resident AVD expert at cubesys?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, hey guys, George Zajakovski, one of the senior cloud consultants at cubesys. My work primarily has been AVD pretty much since the pandemic, such a hot topic since then. Prior to that, a lot of end user compute and VDI with Citrix, VMware, Microsoft RDS, that kind of stuff. A lot of Intune experience as well. And yeah, I mean, lately a lot of the stuff around app attach and sort of what's coming with AVD and all the new sort of bells and whistles that attach onto AVD to make your AVD deployments a lot easier to deploy, and I'll get into some of that detail later on. But yeah, that's me.
Thanks, George. And last but not least, Glen. Glen, do you want to introduce yourself, please? Are you on mute, mate? Unfortunately, you want to start again?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Glen Sharman. I do application packaging, deployment, and migration for cubesys. So I've been working with AVD for about 20 years now.
Now, Glen and I have gone back a long way, right, mate? I worked together on a few things, and I was in my long distant past as an engineer, I was an app packager as well, and I think I spent about 4 years doing that role. And when I met Glen, I realised how little I knew. So we've got a great expert that can help us understand some of these things. And that's where we might start the conversation. Let's do a little bit of history and make sure we understand where AVD started. And Glen, I might get you to do that, right, and get us kicked off. So do you want to give us a quick primer on what the landscape of AVD is and where it came from? And say it's been around for 20 years, that's a long time, right? So just wanted to give a fairly succinct summary of where AVD all began.
Yeah, it's about 25 years now. So it started as SoftGrid from a small startup company, and it was bought by Microsoft in 2006 and rechristened AVD. So at that time, there were a lot of different virtualization products out there. It was a hot area. Microsoft made AVD the default by taking it on, and they added support for it in SCCM. It had always had its own streaming server for deployment, but they integrated it into SCCM. And then Citrix took it on in 2010 as an alternative to their own app virtualization, their own Citrix streaming, at which they discontinued completely, I think around 2013. So at that point, AppV was the option for Citrix as well. AppV is one of these things that's it's been many things to many people. It's when it started off, it was mostly being used to avoid the DLL conflicts that were really common at the time. Applications that you installed them together and one of them didn't work anymore. But it was also an easy way to package and deploy apps. So other people were using it more for that. But what really popularized it was
Oh, I think we've lost him.
Lost him just in the middle of flow of getting the history of AVD. Well, George, maybe Glen sort of has the connection issues there, which is great, isn't it? Great. It's like a live demo or something, isn't it? Oh, you're back.
Here he is.
You're back.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was increasingly seen as a way to deploy apps to VMs without putting them in the image, especially for Citrix. Now, once you've got your apps in AppV format or any of these containerized formats, it's not very easy to get them into another format without the original vendor installers and some notes on how you configured the app and all the other things that went into the AppV in the first place. And of course, that's often hard to come by later on, several years down the track. So it's a lot easier just to keep using the AppVs that you have if you've already got AppVs. And so people were quite alarmed, I think, when Microsoft announced that there was.
We've got some breakup again. So I'll Glen's coming. George, I'm going to jump to the next slide because I think Glen could probably talk all day about AppV. I know he's got a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience in that space. And we'll clear up some of the news from Microsoft about what's happening in the future with AppV in later in the presentation. But George, talk to us about how we make use of modern packaging apps in AVD and how we bring it all together for a VDI environment.
Yeah. So basically, look, for those that don't know what app attach is, it sort of follows on from what AppV was, that whole containerized sandbox bubble mode application where you can sort of lift it and move it around into different environments as needed, provided that you've got the right infrastructure behind it. But where app attach sort of differs from a lot of the, AppV or any other sort of deployment options, like I think it was like ThinApps was another one from VMware, and you had to have a lot of infrastructure and servers behind it, where app attach in AVD is essentially, serverless. Like, you don't need to do any, you just need to supply it with a package, upload it, and then you can then use that package to then containerize an application and push it to a particular set of host pools. So looking at that image there, it's kind of like Lego blocks, right? So we're kind of, we've got an operating system there as sort of one container, we've got a user profile as another container, and then we've got two applications that are tied on top of that as well. And everything is sort of containerized and modular, where you can replace an app with another app and not break anything inside the system. You no longer really need to, create thick, fat gold images with every single app under the sun. It's a lot more streamlined and easier to control and manage with app attach.
And you've got a nice diagram about that, I think, George. You can sort of visualize a little bit about how we can avoid all those conflicts and avoid the hard work that we used to have to do to put everything in the gold image, right? And the conflicts then we would get between different applications.
Yeah. So basically, right up the top there, we've got a storage account, whether it's Azure files or NetApp files, and they will typically host your FSLogix profiles for your AVD session hosts. And then you'd have your applications there as well. And now those applications can be, I think, a SimFS format, VHD, VHDX, MSIX, a couple of different options. But they sit up in a file share, and you essentially mount those applications to a host pool, or you assign them to a host pool or a set of host pools. So more than one host can use the same application, and these are read-only, like they're mounted to the session host as read-only. And then users can essentially launch those applications if they've been assigned via a remote app or a desktop. So with that flow diagram there down the bottom, I mean, as a user logs in, they might log into that developer desktop in the middle. They'll get they'll get an application and a profile. But if they log into the finance desktops, they'll get a separate profile, because it's not a good thing to roam Windows profiles between different OS versions, for example. But they can get 2 applications there versus the one in the developer desktops. And you can reassign where you want applications to go based on what your users are doing inside the environment. So essentially, you could, if you really wanted to, you could literally have one host pool and then just assign applications to your users as needed, provided that nothing's going to conflict with anything else, provided that the right size SKU, number of users, that kind of thing is all set up correctly. That's pretty much AppAttach at a really high level. I'll get into some of the detail a little bit later on, but I was
going to say that in the audience, like we will have time for some questions, right? So if that explanation prompts something that you want to know about, then please ask. But I'm keen now to get into some of the real world, right? And it's all well and good cubesys with our experts and lots of experience come and talk about how the tech works. Let's have a chat about how that manifests itself inside one of our clients. And obviously, Russell, who introduced himself earlier, is one of those clients and has got a great story. So, Russell, maybe you could start us off by telling us where you started in your journey, right? And what Uniting Vic.Tas looked like as you came up to this problem, and then and the options that you looked at to sort of solve what you're going to do with your app delivery.
Sure. So a little bit about Uniting Vic.Tas to start with. So Uniting Vic.Tas is a community services organization that's focused on reducing the impact of poverty, trauma, and disadvantage to people across Australia, well, across Victoria and Tasmania, actually. It was established in 2017, and it was formed by merging 24 founding agencies into one organization and those founding agencies across 140 sites in Victoria and Tasmania, and we're delivering over 600 service delivery programs. So there's not applications.
So no IT challenges there, Russell, at all, with all those different starting points, right? No, they're all simple and straightforward, yeah.
And while the organization was started in 2017, that's when we started the merger of those 24 founding agencies. And it was really a lift and shift of applications and IT services into one centralized organization. And we took legacy applications and that were either already packaged in AppV or needed to be packaged, and then they were packaged by founding agency staff, contractors and partners, and delivered via Citrix. There was very poor documentation of that process and poor knowledge retention, as well those founding agency staff might have left the organization, and IT services would transition to different groups, and we stopped using those IT partners. So we had a Citrix solution delivering those applications that really had very poor documentation. And then we were at the state where we now needed to do a life cycle replacement of this aging Citrix solution, which is on-premise in Azure. It didn't fully cater for our business functional needs, all the standard Citrix issues across problems with team support and all the modernization that's moved along, and Citrix itself as end of life the platform, moving to their cloud-based platform, and we were using Dell-wise terminals, which were end of life.
Pretty much tick every box when it comes to the challenges of technical debt and organizational mergers. And I've done lots of mergers and acquisition type work, but I don't think I've ever come across 24 different entities at once coming together. So that's quite a challenge, right? So you basically up against it, right? And not in a very good place. So
we raised the project to move those 2,000 staff and volunteers with approximately 80 applications via Citrix onto AVD. We were planning to repackage the applications because at that stage Microsoft were not supporting AppV, and the plan was to replace the end user devices, repackage applications, publish to users via AVD, and as part of that tender feedback, we provisioned $200,000 for repackaging applications via external resources with external resource assistance, as well as our own internal resources and testing.
And that would have, I mean, outsourcing that would have solved the labour point, but then to your point about documentation and knowledge, most of that would have been really difficult, right, to get all of those apps working again, right? I mean,
it was a very large risk to our project about whether we would be able to move everything across effectively. Luckily, cubesys was involved in the tender, and they pointed out that Microsoft had recently started supporting AppV, and you won the tender, and we decided to move forward with that. The project essentially kicked off in January. There was a lot of delays on our side about pushing out end user devices, but we then provisioned the AVD infrastructure and started testing those applications. Just a native move, picking up the application out of Citrix or the AppV package and publishing it into a test AVD environment and going through UAT. The vast majority of the applications worked straight up, well, almost straight up, a couple of configurations, but no major changes. There are challenges with a couple of the applications, but I believe that comes back to the way the application was packaged initially, and it doesn't contain all the elements of the package.
Yeah, so it's not the platform and delivery mechanism, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's more, it's the old package that needed to be tweaked a little bit,
Yeah, but the majority of the applications are signed off after UAT, and we're actually going live with the first wave on the 27th of May, so next week exactly. And we're not foreseeing any major issues.
Because you've gone through all that UAT testing and everything's working pretty well, right?
Yeah.
Good. So the impact on the organisation then Russell is quite significant, right? Not only from a sort of financial point of view, $200,000 of savings, not to be sniffed at. That's great, right? But also like the risk and the effort internally to manage all of that. That's a significant benefit, right? That you've managed to realise through the use of the continued use of AppV. Right?
Correct. We haven't improved our application documentation as such because we picked up an existing package and just republished it, but we're comfortable that they're going to work. A lot of those are legacy applications that we're moving away from, so the repackaging would really not have gained us very much other than being able to get rid of Citrix.
Just to continue on what you're doing, because you're right, I was going to ask that. So with so many legacy apps from entities from way before 2017, right? Some of those apps will be on a retirement path. I mean, that's what you're alluding to, right? They'd be
the vast majority of the applications are in the process of being retired. I mean, we spoke about we're delivering approximately 80 applications via Citrix. We've retired about half those applications through the AVD project itself. So there's a good outcome for us, but it's been good.
Yeah. George, you're about to jump in with something there,
Yeah. I was just going to say, probably just to shed some light on some of the applications, some of the challenges that we've seen with migrating some of these applications into AppAttach. Like Russell said, majority of them work flawlessly. A couple of configuration stuff, ports, firewalls, things like that need to be opened up, end user testing, etc. There are a couple of applications that we run into some issues, like everything. AppAttach is not perfect. It's got its issues, and obviously Microsoft are looking to fix, in the coming future. But one of the issues particularly is the entry points that AppV sort of creates for applications when packaged in AppV. When you go to move that over to AppAttach, for whatever reason, the entry points don't seem to work when publishing applications as a remote app. But if you publish it inside the desktop, the application works fine. So, things like that, like little sort of gotchas that, for this particular application, we'll probably have to go back and try and repackage it or maybe push it as a desktop or something like that. But, there are little things that might catch you out, if you were to go on a journey over to AppAttach using pre-existing applications that you want to convert.
There's a couple of gotchas there and things that we need to tweak, right? But the overall vast majority is we've taken legacy AppVs, and Russell, I think you alluded to some of those were before from the initial entities that they've been packaged, so they're probably several years old, right?
Yes.
AppV packages that you've lost knowledge of, and we've moved them across to AVD and being able to leverage that, right? And so the business benefit of that is significant, and the impact on IT operations to not have to reinvent that is also significant, right? And I think that's one of the main takeaways that we wanted our audience to hear today was from your story, is that because Microsoft made that move for AppV into AppAttach, we're able to continue leveraging that investment you've made right in there, and we don't need to go back and repackage lots and lots of apps. So if you're on that journey and you've got lots and lots of AppV, right, no, we don't need to throw it away. We can reuse it inside of AVD using AppAttach. And we're going to unpack some of the technology in a bit. And if I just want to highlight that's important.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there as well, Paul, just to mention, you know, we've got that application technology stack as well, right? But then the other thing that, you know, Russell and his team have done is they've moved away from fat images as well, and essentially reusing what they already have to create an SOE or applications that are production ready. So we're no longer using gold images, right? We are using a marketplace image that's modular, that's patched by Microsoft every single month. We grab that image, we run some automation on it to bring it up to a SOE. So we sort of like build it like as if it were a SCCM task sequence, essentially. And then because we've got those applications across in AppAttach, we could just dynamically attach them into the image and then have it ready to go within a matter of, you know, half an hour at most. With that being said, there's no monthly patching of anything really, because Microsoft patched these images for us. So as
we're using the marketplace, you're pulling that image down, the new one, and reusing that every month, and you've automated that process, right? So that the impact on operations is minimal. And because of the application virtualization layering, and because we're using AppAttach and AppV, all the apps just appear on top of that anyway, right? So from a security and compliance and patching thing, it's like really easy, because a lot of the stuff we would have problems with in VDI around monthly patching would be breaking the apps every month, right, and having to retest them. Russell and his team doesn't need to retest them because they're locked up there, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, unpack that. That sounds another boon and operational benefit, right, for our clients, which is good, right? And so that's how we should be using cloud, right, wherever possible. Cool. Also, anything else you want to add? I mean, it's a great story, right? And move the needle for you from what would look like a big roadblock and a bit of a headache to something that's next week when we go live will be nice and smooth, right? And fucking rolling.
I would have loved for this to be in 2 weeks' time. You could have provided the feedback after go live.
You'll have to talk to our marketing team about that.
Oh no, I don't need to take up too much of your time. But yes, it's all gone very smoothly until now, touch wood, and hopefully everything's going to work great.
Yeah, I mean,
and all the indications are that it will.
Yeah. When you get through UAT, usually we have very little problems with AVD beyond that point, right? It's very rare that the scaling is an issue, right? So I'm optimistic too. And look, for the audience, they're more than happy to, if you keep an eye on our blog posts or whatever, we'll go and ask Russell how it's gone in a couple of weeks and see if we get a thumbs up, which I'm sure we will. Okay, I'm just checking the chat, mate, guys. Remind you all that it is a discussion. You're more than welcome to ask questions of any of the panelists. Please chuck a question in there for us anytime. But with a great success story like that, let's maybe dive a little bit more into the tech again, right? And make sure that you understand a bit. So if we move on, there we go. So George and Glen, we'll just unpack a bit more about why AppAttach matters for AVD. What's the real impact of it?
Yeah.
Right? Do you want to start us off, George?
Yeah, look, I think maybe before we get into why AppAttach matters, maybe we take a step back and see how people have packaged applications previously, right? Because it's all, you know, AppAttach, AppV, thin apps, can't remember what the Citrix one is called. But, you know, these are all containerized applications that we can sort of just, you know, take wherever and, you know, import them into an environment. But previously, Glen, probably more so for yourself, like what's some of the, what were some customers doing to like package applications without some of these technologies? Like what's the real legacy way, the old school way?
Yeah, well, what people were doing is using the vendor installers and applying some configuration to that. So MSI or set up XE or whatever the vendor provided. And, you know,
we lost him again.
Where Glen is today, but like he's picked a poor internet, hasn't he, to join this one? We'll have to have a word with him afterwards.
Yeah. Look, I think
I remember stepping like from back from my packaging, George, days. I can remember having to capture applications and then tweak the registry key and remove like bits and pieces. It was an arduous task to build an MSI back in the day from those setup X's. Glen, we keep losing you. We're going to come around and upgrade your internet, I think, for you next time. But we'll,
No, he's gone again. Maybe turn the camera off, Glen. Look, I think I'm just going to take a stab at where Glen was going with this. But back in the day, you would have those switches and those arguments, for an XE, for an executable, whatever. Problem with that is you then need to figure out a way to get it uninstalled, to get it, checked, detection methods, all that kind of stuff. Also, did it play nice with what was already on the operating system?
Yeah.
Could you run two applications of the same thing at the same time? That kind of stuff. So when it comes to
DLL conflicts and all that type of things, and things exactly wouldn't play the different versions of Java you would need to get applications working, etc., right? Jonathan, and I think that's where you were going to with that question, George, was. So before, having to do that all within the operating system, was hard work and sometimes impossible, right? Exactly. And that's where that virtualization layer of application technologies came in, and why AVD was so powerful, right, and useful. And hence, lots of organizations like Russell's, etc., were using AVD to try and solve some of those conflict problems, right, and make the ongoing operations. Because the problem is with the conflicts, every time an app upgrades or even the operating system upgrades, we've got the potential of having more problems again, right? And so it's just hard work for IT ops, right?
Yeah. Look, it's still kind of the case now as well. I mean, but it's less likely to break something inside the package because it's separate to the operating system. So whatever you're patching on one end doesn't affect the other end. So it's a little bit more modular and granular control. The other thing as well is when it comes to, I guess, moving applications into app attach or creating them natively in app attach. Because you do have that separation, I think I mentioned before, we don't need to, I guess, have a fat image, right? It's always going to be streamlined approach or sort of SCCM task sequence style where you're building upon something. So Microsoft obviously patch the images every single month, and we inject or we essentially mount those applications to the operating system. That brings me to that first point there. So streamlines image management. So we don't need to constantly patch images, check applications, check if there's any conflicts, check DLLs, all that kind of stuff. It really allows us to be flexible with what we do inside our AVD environments, how many host pools we've got set up, how many images we've got set up. Because of that separation from the application and the operating system. When it comes to flexibility and scalability, the new app attach essentially allows us to connect a single application to more than one host pool, right? So you don't need to create duplicates of the application. You can say, I'm running Google Chrome, for example, and I want to push that to 20 host pools with 500 users. You create one package for it, and away you go.
And that's a fairly recent change, right, George, with the move from Microsoft when they upgraded app attach, right? Before you would have to have a separate instance of that package for every host pool, right? And it was a bit of an overhead, right?
Yeah. So what Paul's referring to there is there is MSIX app attach and then the newly app attach. I don't know why Microsoft didn't change the name completely on this one because it's a little bit confusing for some people, but MSIX app attach is the old way of publishing applications via AVD, whereas app attach is the new way. So some of the differences is in the new app attach, permissions are applied per application per user, whereas in the old method, it would be assigned to a host pool and every single user that logs in would see it. So you've got a lot more granular control. In the new app attach, you can use the same image across all host pools, whereas with the old one, you have to create a package for each host pool and publish it that way. With the new app attach, applications can run on any session host that's running Windows in the same region. Whereas in the old one, applications could only run on a host pool in which they're added to. So you couldn't run it across different operating systems. The new app attach applications can be upgraded, so you don't need to bring down the host pool or put into maintenance mode or anything like that. You can work on the image and publish a new version of that image, and then users will automatically get that newly published image. And anyone that's already running the old version will, when they log off, when they sign out, it'll sort of drop that connection, and then they'll be forced to start using the new application. With that being said, you can now run two versions of the same application, from the same user. So, if there's a requirement for that, you can do that as well. So there's a lot more things you can do.
I didn't know that one, George.
Than the old one.
So unpack that one a little bit for me, because obviously, as we upgrade applications and we want people to test it, and sometimes want to see them side by side, maybe, right? You can actually achieve that. You're saying now with app attach?
You can't actually choose it. It's more of a. So if I'm using an application and then you log in, you would get the same application that I've got, right? If I was to make a change to anything, to the application in the background, and then Russell logs in, he would get the newer version of the application that we've just published, and you and I will still be running that older one. When we log off, we'll release that sort of old session and grab. So
it's not so much side by side; it's more that it eases the path for change for you. So allows you to, without disrupting the business, right?
Yep, exactly right. Also, with the old MSI app attach, it was very limited in which file formats it could handle. Whereas with the new one, we can do AppV, which is, it was only recently added, I think in the last 6 months or so, or 8 months, something like that. But we can do AppX and MSIX as well. And then finally, some of the image formats that we can run are obviously AppV, so we can grab an existing AppV package and import it. We can do SimFS, VHDX, or VHD images and bring them across, and then you would just see them as disks assigned inside the virtual machine. If you were to look at like a disk manager or something like that. So you'd see a whole bunch of applications that have been mounted, similar to the way FS Logic's profiles are mounted inside a AVD session host. One key thing I want to bring up is that last point there, improved license and access control. This is one that I've used for a couple of customers previously, and you can do this multiple different ways, but I think the way App Attach does it now is probably the best of all of the solutions. So previously I would use something like FS Logic's application masking to hide licensed applications from users who were not licensed for it. Whereas now with App Attach, if you were to containerize an application, publish it to say every single host pool in your AVD environment and say, okay, these 10 users are the only ones that have got a license to Adobe Pro, for example, right? We assign that Adobe Pro to every single host pool, but we only publish it to those 10 users. So when they go to log into any of the 10 host pools, that Adobe licensed application follows them around. And because they're the only ones that are licensed for it, they're the only ones that can see it and launch it. So it really helps with licensed applications.
Yeah, I can see where that would be like really powerful in some use cases, depending on the user moving around the different host pools for different scenarios, right? But they've got some key app that they need for productivity or whatever, they can follow you around. That's fantastic, right?
Yeah. And I think the real quick, the last one is applications that some users might be power users of an application, some users might be light users of an application. So you could publish the same application to two separate host pools, one of them being a high-end GPU, CPU number crunching machine, whereas the other one just be like a standard desktop VM. But the same application is published to both, and depending on what you want to do inside the application, do you want to run number crunching numbers, or do you want to just view some read-only data or whatever? You've got the option to sort of log into either or from the same application, which is awesome.
Great. And we've got a question from Matt. So thank you, Matt, for asking the first question. Hopefully we'll get a bit of a flow because this is a discussion series. The question is, George, how do you handle M365 apps and licensing?
So M365 apps, generally, we use a marketplace image that contains the M365 apps pre-built into it, unless there's some sort of requirement to deploy it with a custom XML, etc. But we have them baked into the image. We don't necessarily separate them out. And in terms of
also, just to add quickly, that Microsoft, when they released that image, they're updated and patched as well as the operating system, right? So they're always up to date. Yeah. So carry on. So.
Yep. In terms of licensing, I mean, generally when we deploy a AVD environment, we check for these kind of things with licensing. So typically in an AVD environment, you'd shared computer licensing. All of your users would need to have, I think, a F3 at minimum, off the top of my head. So as long as they meet those requirements, they can launch an application. If that's not the case or users don't have that, then you can look at tools like FSLogic's application masking to hide all of the Microsoft suite of applications from users that are not licensed for it or that need to go and use like a web-based version. But generally speaking, I wouldn't package M365 like Office, Word, Excel, etc. Like an AVD package. I don't find there's a need because Microsoft patch it for you. Yeah.
Sorry, George.
Yes.
With us using both volunteers and employees using our environment, the volunteers are using F3 licensing, and they don't get Office as a package, but they can still launch the apps that they need to launch. So yes, F3 is definitely the one.
Goes out.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's one of the licensing nuances. So long story short there for you, Matt, is there's depending on the scenario, there's a few different ways we can do that. Generally, if we want to leave the apps in the image, right, and we hide them away from the people that are not licensed for them, we've got a few different tools and techniques to do that. Right?
Yeah.
So if that answered your question, please
pop
mine if you want to know.
You certainly can, containerize them if you wanted to, and if you wanted to run like a really clean version of Windows, it's completely up to you. But generally speaking, because Microsoft patch it for us, let them keep patching it. It's one less thing.
Well, the other thing I remember from my patching days is that often lots of applications make calls to the Microsoft Office suite, right? So you've been inside an app and you can open Excel or Word or whatever it might be. So leaving it in the base was always a good idea generally, right? So that if a third-party application or line of business app needed Excel, for example, then they could launch it easily, right? And I used to, maybe I'm getting a bit long in the tooth and away from the tools too long, but that was one of the things that was tricky with AVD at the beginning, right? That you had to make sure that you had the connections to these other apps. And I remember it being drawn as a bubble, and then you had to connect to the other apps in order to leverage those connections to third-party apps, right? And that was tricky. Right? I don't know if Glen's internet's going to let him speak, but I'm sure he can allude a little bit on that. And when we virtualize applications, it's important that they can access the operating system. And if you want two apps to talk to each other, there's a bit of extra configuration, right, man?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was always an isolation technology in order to fix those DLL conflict issues that used to be common, but that we don't really see now. So if you wanted an AppV to see, the AppV would already see stuff that was on the operating system, but it wouldn't see another application. So integration with other applications was a bit tricky. Yeah, that was always a limitation of it, that it was inherently designed to isolate the application, and some apps don't like the isolation.
Yeah, good reason to keep the Microsoft apps in the operating system, right? So then they're easily accessible. Right?
I think with all virtual application, app attach, AppV, whatever, I think the common limitation across all of them these days is still drivers. So if an application needs drivers or needs to talk to the OS, you still can't do that. Is that right, Glen? There's no way to.
And the reason for that is because those are installed to the operating system. Those are part of the operating system. Yeah. So anything that's part of the operating system can't be in the AppV bubble. that app. So there are ways around that. You can install the driver to the real machine from the AppV with a script. So there were workarounds.
Yeah. I just
onto our last slide, guys. I don't want to make sure I know we're getting short on time, and Asta will be chasing me around the timing. So we wanted to clear up some of the messaging from Microsoft as best we could, because it is a little bit confusing, right? Because I know there was a lot of nervousness around, and some of the questions Russell's team asked was like, well, haven't Microsoft just deprecated AppV? And the answer is yes and no, right? So Microsoft are definitely end of life and deprecating MDOP, and AppV sat inside of MDOP. But what they've actually done is deprecate the streaming server, and I think the sequencer. Did we get an answer to that, guys? Whether the sequencer was in or out? Anybody know? It was a bit confusing, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's so when I deployed MDOP the other day, there was a banner across it saying that this is going to be the AppV stuff's going to be removed. So I don't know with that one, to be honest. The sequencer is essentially what you use to create or capture an application into an AppV format. So I think get it while you can, and install it somewhere, and keep that one in your back pocket. But yeah, the MDOP is the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack. So that's the thing that you would generally use to do SCCM upgrades, to do the WinPE, and it's got a whole bunch of other tools in there. So that's what MDOP is, in case anyone's wondering.
Yeah, so MDOP's definitely going. AppV, the streaming server, is definitely going. But what is staying is the AppV packaging technology, and we're seeing that being delivered now. And the delivery mechanism will be app attach inside of AVD, and that'll be its main purpose, right? So hopefully, please ask questions if that's confusing. It was confusing for us, but we know that is true. And we got a date on there for the deprecation of MSIX app attach. Do you want to explain that one, George, for us, please?
Yeah, 10 days. So pretty much in 10 days' time, if you jump on Microsoft's documentation, if you are using MSI App Attach, there is scripts and things like that to migrate those applications from MSIX App Attach to App Attach. So just jump on their website for that. But yeah, that's in 10 days' time. They're no longer going to support that. You need to be using the newer App Attach for that.
Yeah, so that's really an upgrade path for App Attach within the AVD platform, right? So if you are using that today, be aware of that date.
Yeah. Just with that last one as well, the AppV stuff. Yes, all the servers are going, and just a reminder of AppV used to have a streaming server, used to have, I think, a SQL database, used to have infrastructure server. Like there was 3 or 4 different servers behind it just to push an application to a bunch of users. So, with App Attach, all of that is gone. You literally just provide a file, and away you go, which is absolutely awesome. And the less maintenance, the better. The less moving parts, the better, really.
So we are pretty much at time. I'll ask the speakers if they've got any final comments before I wrap up. Be good. And for the audience, if you do think of questions afterwards, feel free to get in touch. We're more than happy to help. Russell, do you have a thought, or a final thought?
No, I don't have anything further to say at the moment.
I thought you leant forward. I thought you were going to say something.
No.
Well, in that case, let me thank you for joining us. I know your time is busy as an IT ops manager and heading up the IT team there. I know you're always busy, so I really, really appreciate your time and joining us today. Great story. Glad we were able to help. George and Glen, as always, subject matter experts inside the cubesys team. Thank you for joining us. And for all the audience, thank you. I hope you got some value from that. And if you do have questions afterwards or things occur to you, reach out. George and Glen will be more than happy to help.
So, right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.